My grandpa Vova was a recluse and a raging alcoholic. He didn't look for drinking buddies. He just bought booze at the nearest store and returned to his lonely apartment to spend another drunken day, losing track of the hours and days in a pungent haze. He didn't accumulate utility debts. He could skimp on food. His refrigerator was often empty. But 2 or 3 bottles on the table were an integral part of his life. The old man was in his 70s, but he drank like a young man. All the neighbors worried about him, and their anxiety was well-founded. They were afraid he would die locked inside, and they wouldn't notice. They probably didn't want his corpse to suddenly stink up the entire entryway. So, at the slightest thing, they would immediately call me, his only close relative who stayed in touch. The main overseer, Aunt Nadia, would call me at least twice a week. Hello? I'd answer the phone, already knowing what she was going to say. Hi, Dim. Your grandpa isn't opening the door again. I'm knocking, but he can't hear me, said Aunt Nadia. Damn it, I'll be right over, I promised. We lived on neighboring streets. It was about a 10-minute walk to his place. This had happened so many times, and every time, it turned out the old man had just drunk himself into a stupor and was asleep. But I couldn't not check. I knew that any of my visits could be the last. It was always nerve-wracking to turn the key in the lock. Grandpa, are you alive? I entered the smoke-filled apartment, this familiar, stale little world of a hardened alcoholic with yellowed wallpaper and rust-colored ceilings from cheap tobacco, with decade-old cobwebs in the corners and piles of old rags at every turn. My grandfather was lying on the worn-out carpet in the living room. An unfinished bottle stood at his feet. The old man mumbled, opening his eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief. Phew, he's alive. But then Grandpa's hand trembled as he held it out. He didn't just seem drunk. I squatted down and looked into his clouded eyes. Grandpa, you can't talk, I said. This was the last thing I needed. I was scared to the point of my knees trembling. I thought the old man was paralyzed. Now I'd have to care for a bedridden man. I called an ambulance. While I waited, I kept fussing over my grandpa, trying to get a word out of him, but he just barely moved his pale lips and groaned. Soon, a calm and professional guy in a blue uniform arrived, glanced at the old alcoholic, said, all right, and unhurriedly reached into his medical kit. Then, smack, he gave my grandpa an injection, and his eyes cleared up immediately. A couple of minutes later, the old man smiled and said, "Oh, that feels so much better. Thanks, doctor. I thought I was a goner." "What was wrong with him?" I asked, standing in complete shock. I hadn't expected them to fix my relative so easily, especially after such a collapse. "Nothing much," the paramedic replied, closing his kit. "He was drinking and not eating. His sugar dropped. I gave him a shot of glucose and everything's fine. Until next time." "You're not going to change your habits, are you, Vladimir Viktorovich?" He said it more as a statement than a question. Why would I? Grandpa was already sitting on the carpet in a frog-like pose, eyeing the unfinished bottle. Let me live as I want, at least in my old age. My wife nagged me my whole life, wouldn't let me have a drink in peace. Now, I'm my own boss. I started scolding him. "Ever since Grandma died, you've been going all out. You're never sober. Grandpa, this is out of line. It's my legal right," the old man grumbled. As I walked the paramedic out, I automatically said, "I'm sorry." He just nodded understandingly. For him, this was nothing terrible. How many alcoholics did he revive every shift? He was used to it. Just another routine case. Grandpa has stirred everyone up again. The neighbors, me, the ambulance, he made everyone nervous, I mumbled. "And who asked you to fuss?" the old man asked, scratching his unshaven cheek with complete indifference. "You're all fluttering around me on your own. So that's your thanks for pulling you back from the brink," I hissed. The old man waved his hand. Oh, stop talking nonsense. I haven't been to the other side yet. My head just got a little dizzy. A pity. You could have told us if there's anything interesting there. I brought a trash bag from the kitchen and started putting the empty bottles into it. The clinking of glass filled the silence of the smoky, gloomy room. We'll all be there someday, the old man said quietly after a long silence. Then I remembered an interesting idea. There's this phenomenon where friends or relatives make a kind of pact. Whoever leaves this world first will try to send a message from the afterlife, and I proposed it to my old man. Grandpa, seriously, let's make a deal. If you ever die, which I doubt, of course, give me a sign from over there. I'm curious if there's anything there or not. Grandpa Vova immediately agreed. All right, you'll get a sign in the form of a slap on the back of the head. I'm going to buy you something to eat, I said. And you, no more drinking today. Okay? Buy me some sausages, Grandpa demanded. The cheapest ones. Don't get the expensive kind. He was such a Scrooge that he even saved my money. A truly amazing guy. I knew his time would come someday. He couldn't keep carrying on locked up forever, but it seemed like it wouldn't happen in the next month, or even this year, but sometime later, in some distant future. And then, a couple of weeks later, I had a nightmare. It was so realistic that I jolted awake, though you couldn't even call it a dream. Just a momentary vision, a flash of terror. For a moment, I saw my grandfather's frightened face. He looked at me with wide open eyes and screamed, "Dimka! Dimka!" His voice was full of despair. I woke up trembling and sat up in bed. It was terrifying. My heart was pounding like crazy. After that, a bad feeling wouldn't leave me. I wanted to go check on Grandpa, but he didn't like people coming over without a reason, so I just waited for the neighbor to get worried again. My anxiety grew with each passing hour. I thought if something happened, Aunt Nadja would be the first to know. She didn't call, so I decided to call her myself. "Hello?" the woman answered. "Hello, Aunt Nadja," I began awkwardly. "I haven't heard anything about my grandpa for a while. Have you dropped by his place?" "I haven't," she replied. "When was the last time you were there? He hasn't been seen for a while." I got caught up in my own things and forgot about him. A chill went down my spine. I hung up the phone and ran to the next street. Aunt Nadia was already standing by the building. There was anxiety on her face. I quickly went up to the second floor and, with a heart of stone, turned the key in the lock. The apartment reeked of tobacco, but it was a stale smell, not fresh smoke. Beyond the threshold, there was complete, oppressive, unfamiliar silence. Feeling like I was floating, I walked into the living room and froze in the doorway. Grandpa. The old man was lying on his back with his mouth open. His skin was as gray as cigarette ash. Life had completely left his body. "Well, what about him?" the neighbor asked impatiently from the entryway. "He's dead," I answered, not believing it myself. "What do you mean dead?" Aunt Nadia's voice changed. "He's really dead. My grandfather, who seemed indestructible, had passed on to the next world. What kind of life did he have? He sat within four walls, didn't even read books, watch television, or listen to the radio. He just drowned himself in cheap vodka to forget. What did he even think about? Maybe he was just passing the time, waiting for his lonely, alcohol-soaked life to finally end." The medics later said that Grandpa had been dead for 2 days. It was strange that there was no smell at all. "It's because he was completely pickled in alcohol," I thought jokingly. And what do you know? Exactly 2 days ago, he appeared to me in that micro-nightmare. Could his frightened spirit have come to me as promised? When they took the body away, I felt so sad. I had never seen this old apartment without my grandfather. It felt impossibly empty. First, Grandma was gone, and now him, vanished. How sad. A sad but logical end. Oh, Vovka, he drank his whole life away. The neighbor sighed, and then asked, "Are you the heir to the apartment?" Her tone was full of curiosity. Well, I guess so. I hadn't even thought about it. The thought stunned me. That's right. The apartment is mine, and it's much more spacious than the studio I lived in. This slightly dulled my pain. Such unexpected comfort and grief. I looked around. I could clean up here, throw out all the junk, do some renovations. But that, of course, would come later. First, the funeral. Everything had to be done properly, with due respect for his memory. I had to run around a lot to get everything arranged. Thankfully, I didn't have to find a plot in the cemetery. Naturally, he should be buried next to Grandma. 2 days passed in a flurry of activity, and the day before the burial, I decided to clean up the apartment a bit. Not to move in anytime soon, but just because. Why keep all that trash there? The space should be clean. Grandpa's apartment had 2 rooms. One was small, with a wardrobe and an old bed that no one had slept in since Grandma's death. And the living room. In it were a sofa, a carpet, and a display cabinet with a crystal set. Everything else was junk. Bottles, bags, rags, old shoes, and felt boots. It could all be safely thrown out to clear space for renovations. It took me a whole day to put the unnecessary things into bags and take them out. The work was not easy. When it got dark outside, I decided to leave and continue another day. I turned off the light in the living room, and suddenly a quiet voice came from somewhere. They haven't even buried me yet, and my grandson is already taking over. I definitely heard it. A hoarse, muffled grumble, not from inside the apartment, but as if from behind the wall. And in response, someone else grunted questioningly, an unintelligible but creepy mumbling. To better understand the conversation, I moved closer to the wall where the display cabinet stood. The voices were coming from there. "The funeral is tomorrow. For now, I'm in the morgue," someone said behind the wall. My heart sank into my stomach. That grumbling sounded so much like my grandpa Vova, and such a strange phrase. Who among the living would say they're lying in a morgue? Only a madman or someone dead. It occurred to me that I had accidentally overheard a conversation between 2 dead people, my grandfather and someone else. Are they still lingering in this house? It's terrifying to think about. My mind refused to believe it. Everything went quiet. I quickly went out into the hallway, turned on the light, got my things, and left. I wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. They brought Grandpa from the morgue at 11 a.m. to the cemetery gates. Elderly relatives and neighbors were at the funeral. Only one woman was crying, Aunt Nadia, who was no relation to him at all, and even then, she was probably just shedding tears for the sake of propriety, just a tribute to the ritual. People rarely cry and wail at the funerals of the elderly. It's the young everyone feels sorry for. Old folks are supposed to die. That's the general unspoken rule. I think I was the saddest one among those seeing him off. Grandpa and I were connected only by blood ties, not common interests. Still, a sense of irreplaceable loss cut into my soul. He was a likable character, despite his flaws. His absence was keenly felt. Before they closed the coffin lid, I looked at the old man's face and said quietly, "Goodbye, Grandpa Vav. I hope you're okay over there. Rest in peace and thank you for everything." I thought I had received enough hints about the existence of an afterlife. First, the premonition of my relative's death in the form of a short dream. Then the voices in the dark. These signs were unsettling. A skeptic would say, "So what? You misheard something?" I would have forgotten about it myself over time. But a little later, something much more explicit happened. Something that shook me to my core. About a week had passed since Grandpa's funeral. I was slowly cleaning up his apartment. I would come for an hour a day, take out the remaining trash, clean and fix things. In short, I was slowly bringing the place back to a decent state. The task seemed monumental, and I didn't like how slowly things were moving. So one day, I took a day off and worked there all day, sweating profusely. I rolled up the old carpet, tore off the ripped linoleum in the hallway, and dismantled the dilapidated kitchen set. To do it right, everything had to go. The apartment had long been in need of a major renovation. I was busy there for a long time, and when I looked at the clock, good heavens, it was almost midnight. I was so tired my eyes were closing. I was completely exhausted. I thought, what's the difference? This is my home too. I can spend the night here. I went into my grandmother's room, lay down right in my clothes, covered myself with a blanket, scrolled through my phone for about 10 minutes, and dozed off. And sometime later, I woke up to a faint clinking sound. It was the crystal set in the living room cabinet trembling, as if someone was shaking the cabinet. The sound was faint but distinct. I wasn't scared out of my wits. Rather, I felt a mixture of creepiness and curiosity. A strange combination of emotions. Grandpa, this is another one of your signs. I get it. I get it. Stop it, I whispered. And then, a crash and the sound of shattering glass erupted in the living room. I could hear the dishes hitting the floor and flying into pieces. The entire crystal collection had crashed onto the carpet. From behind the wall, I heard the distinct clatter of shoes on a wooden floor. First steps, and then what sounded like a slam. A door had slammed shut. Why immediately blame ghosts? Maybe the neighbors were acting up. My mind searched for a rational explanation. I brought a broom, swept a path, and walked over to the display cabinet. Something subtle but insistent told me I had to move it. And when I did, I saw a deep hole behind it. A huge gaping hole the size of my palm. Ah, so that's what it is, I thought. All this time, there was a window to the next apartment hidden here. The cabinet must have been placed specifically to cover it. And who would have thought to do such a thing? The thought of someone else's presence in this apartment sent a slight shiver down my spine. I pushed the cabinet further away and looked more closely. The hole was at my eye level. I couldn't see a thing inside it. Absolute, impenetrable blackness. "Hey!" I shouted and heard a booming echo, as if from a deep well or a completely empty enclosed space. No one answered, only an eerie silence. Then I turned on my phone's flashlight and shone it into the darkness. On the other side of the hole was a completely empty room with dark gray walls that looked like they were stained with soot and a wooden floor. There was also an unpainted door and, strangest of all, not a single window. Do rooms like that even exist in residential buildings? Its appearance was extremely unsettling. I squinted and nearly stuck my face into the hole to see everything. On the floor of the room, someone had left dirty footprints, black, earthy tracks. I didn't like any of this, but I decided not to cause a scene in the middle of the night. Morning is wiser than the evening. I needed to gather my thoughts and act rationally. I got up early, took a picture of the broken dish set, then swept up the shards and took a picture of the hole in the wall. It was strange. Morning light was pouring through the windows, but in the hole, it was pitch black. Even when I shone a flashlight in, it was still gloomy in there. The light got lost in a kind of gray haze, like cigarette smoke. No matter how much I looked at that room, I saw nothing in it. A door, walls, nothing else. Just darkness. This was something completely abnormal. Tired of looking at it, I stepped back from the hole and immediately received a blow to the back of my head. Cold fingers touched my neck, lightly scratching the skin with their nails. The chilling touch made me flinch. I spun around sharply, and I swear, there was a hand there. It quickly retreated back into the wall, pale, aged, and on it hung a watch with a leather strap, the very same one with the long, faded face. My grandpa Vova had one just like it. He was buried with it. I immediately remembered his words. "All right, you'll get a sign in the form of a slap on the back of the head." This was that very slap. "Grandpa, is that you?" I shouted into the void. My voice cracked, an echo. It was as if someone was mocking me. How could a dead grandfather be in the next apartment? My brain desperately tried to find a logical explanation for what had happened. I immediately went out onto the stairwell and started knocking on the opposite door. No one opened it. Dead silence. Just then, Aunt Nadia was coming down the stairs and asked, puzzled, "Dim, what are you doing here?" Her gaze slid over my bewildered face. "Oh, I just want to talk to the neighbors," I replied, trying to look natural. "Do you know who lives there?" "No one lives there," the neighbor replied, shrugging. I dropped my hands. "What do you mean?" My voice betrayed my complete bewilderment. Aunt Nadia explained. "Irina Mikhailovna lived there, don't you remember? An old woman. She died last year. She had no relatives. The apartment probably went to the city. It's been sealed up ever since." "I see," I replied, looking around, trying to process what I had heard. There were no other doors on my floor, just this one, and it was empty. "What's wrong?" the curious neighbor asked. "I thought someone was knocking on my wall," I replied, feeling a prickly fear in my stomach. "And voices behind the wall." "Oh, that's probably from upstairs," Aunt Nadia said, waving her hand dismissively. "They're always fighting up there. Been trying to get divorced for 15 years, but just can't manage it." "Yeah, probably them," I said, not about to explain what was really happening. She simply wouldn't have believed me. "Don't go to them. It's useless talking to them." The neighbor went on her way. I remained standing in front of the door. I felt an urge to check the door frame, just in case. And I turned out to be right. To the right, hidden under the wood, was a keyhole and darkened with time. What a strange habit old people have of hiding keys near the door. But it worked in my favor. I looked up the stairs, down the stairs, made sure no one was coming. And with a trembling hand, I opened the lock. A musty smell wafted out, like in any apartment that has been uninhabited for a long time. Particles of whitewash from the ceiling littered the floor in the hallway. The mirror opposite the door gave no clear reflection because of the dust. I went in and closed the door behind me so the neighbors wouldn't see. I peeked into one room, then the other. Old furniture, an ancient television, faded wallpaper, dead flies on the carpets, and there was the wall that bordered my apartment. Except it was completely solid. And this wasn't some room with gray walls. It was the kitchen. I ran my fingers over the rough surface. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My living room was definitely behind this wall, but there was no hole. How could that be? It meant that the hole didn't lead to the neighbor's apartment at all, but to some dark parallel world. Or what? The afterlife. There was no other way to explain it all. Now, I was truly scared. What I had seen before weren't hints at all, but a direct answer, or rather, a slap to the back of the head. Grandpa had reached out his hand from the other side and hit me, just as he'd promised. This can't be happening. I left the other apartment, locked the door, and hid the key back under the frame. My heart was fluttering. I didn't want to go back to my place, knowing that there was nothing less than a portal to the afterlife there. But this was an unprecedented opportunity. How many of the living get the chance to find out what's beyond the veil? I had to go and touch the unknown mystery. The sun suddenly hid behind the clouds. Fine raindrops splattered against the windows. The weather, as if on purpose, added to the creepiness. I entered the living room. The hole in the wall was still there. It was as black as the unknown itself. "Grandpa, are you there? Can you hear me?" I asked in a trembling voice. No one answered. I turned on my phone's flashlight and approached the wall. I had to look in there. It's scary. Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. I shone the flashlight and looked into the opening. A wrinkled face appeared before my eyes. It wasn't my grandfather, but some woman in a black headscarf, pale as death. Though, who knows, maybe it was death herself. 2 sharp fingernails nearly struck me in the face. The old woman was about to plunge them right into my pupils. It's a good thing I jumped back in time and hid behind the wall. "Avert your shameless eyes," a grumpy voice sounded, and then another hoarse voice was heard. And so familiar. "No, don't touch him. That's my grandson." I slid down the wall, my legs turning to jelly. My dead Grandpa Vova was standing up for me against the old woman. "Why did you poke a hole?" the old woman grumbled from behind the wall. "He asked me to," the old man replied to her, and they fell silent. I found the strength to ask, "Grandpa Vova, is it really you? Tell me, what is it like on the other side?" And my deceased relative answered me, "Don't be in a hurry to get here, Dimka. There is nothing here, and there is no light. Only empty rooms and cobwebs in the corners. Mortal anguish." When I looked up at the wall, the hole was gone. It had disappeared without a trace. Even the wallpaper was whole again. But those words will forever remain in my memory. The place where my grandfather ended up. He spent his life in confinement. His existence after death turned out to be the same in empty rooms with cobwebs in the corners. Was this his punishment? Or does the same fate await us all?